In the later years of the 1990s, you'd be hard-pressed to avoid Pokemon, and hell, you'd be hard-pressed to avoid it even now. Sure, the craze has died off a bit since then, but the franchise lives on strong. Even fairly recently, Pokemon Go swept the world by storm, causing a new wave of Pokemania. But today, we're going to take a look at the series as it began, especially in the late 90s with the Game Boy games, merchandise, and the general public's perception of the series. It all started with a Japanese man by the name of Satoshi Tajiri, whose hobby as a child was catching small insects and tadpoles in suburban Tokyo. This, in his adult life, inspired him to create the Pocket Monsters series for the Game Boy in 1996. All of this led to the game series and popular anime that we all know and love today. Back then, you just couldn't avoid this stuff. It was everywhere. There were the games, but you also had the show, comic books, trading cards, there was Monopoly at some point, there were even Pogs. Of course, today Pokemon has been around for over 20 years, so maybe we're all desensitized to the sheer amount of product. But in the 90s, it was like a shitstorm of toys and dolls and cards and all this stuff. Like, you think the game and the cards would be enough, but you really gotta have the figures and the Topps trading cards and the videos. Man, I guess you really did have to catch them all. Since 1996, we've had a steady stream of games coming out every few years, with each set of games improving on the last. And in the main series, there are 33 games, and wow, you think that's enough? That's not even counting all the side games. With those, there's over 110. Who needs that many fucking Pokemon games? Now, the first games we'll be taking a look at are the first and second gen ones. They're on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color systems. These were really the games that made the series take off, with Red and Blue still being in the top 15 for best-selling games of all time. Now, at the time, the aging Game Boy seemed to be a non-starter for Nintendo, as their focus had shifted to developing the N64 and Game Boy sales were slowing down. But when Pokemon finally released, it effectively extended the life of the handheld for a few more years. Now, let's take a look at the console here, and what the hell? I can't even see anything. This isn't even the original Game Boy, and they still chose not to have a backlit screen. The fucking Game Gear had a backlit screen 8 years before this thing, and they released the front-lit Game Boy Light 6 months before the Color came out. Alright, I'm getting ahead of myself here. This is Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue, and for starters, this is a very revolutionary game for its time. RPGs weren't really something a ton of kids were playing, so this was a very easy way to get into the genre. But if you're playing it now and you've played a newer Pokemon game before, the experience feels slow, to say the least. It takes forever to level up your Pokemon, the game didn't feature running at all, and the designs leave a lot to be desired. Now, that's not to say the games are bad or anything. Honestly, they're still some of my favorite games of all time. A plus to them is they're more difficult than newer ones, so players can play through the 6th Gen 1 and 2 games if they're looking for a challenge. Something the newer games succeeded at over these ones, however, is the story. In Red and Blue, the story is pretty much non-existent. All that's there is your fight against Team Rocket, occasional meetings with your rival, and your goal to collect all 150 Pokemon. In Gen 2, the story becomes better and you're given much more concrete goals. The games included in Gen 2 are Gold, Silver, and Crystal, with Crystal being a Game Boy Color exclusive. Honestly, these are some of the best games on Game Boy. Even if you aren't into RPGs, I'm sure there's still something you can get out of them. Moving on to Gen 3, and these are my favorite games out of the entire series, and possibly some of my favorite games of all time. They're on the Game Boy Advance, the successor to the Game Boy. Now, let's just pop the game in and god damn it. You'd think by the year 2001 they'd figure out people actually want to see what's happening on their screens. Now, to be fair, this was fixed by the Game Boy Advance SP, but nowadays either model of the SP go for upwards of $100, and yeah, that's a bit of a steep asking price for someone who's just getting into retro gaming. Getting into the games, there's a remake of Red and Blue, though instead of blue it's now leaf green, and 3 new editions, Sapphire, Ruby, and Emerald. These 3 games are my favorite out of the entire series, and Emerald is nearly $200 used. Now, that's a great game, but $200? It costs twice as much as the system it plays on. Like, seriously, you could even get a Switch Lite for that price. Compared to Gens 1 and 2, the gameplay in all of these games is so smooth and fun. For me, these are really the perfect Pokemon games. These weren't the first Pokemon games I played though, that would be Pokemon Black and White, and it's still a decision I regret to this day. I don't think there's anything wrong with them, it's just looking back at it, Black and White doesn't feel like the best introduction to the series. Again, I don't dislike them, but I wouldn't pick them, or any gen for that matter, over Gen 3. We can't discuss early Pokemon without talking about the anime. Pokemon was a lot of kids' first introduction to anime in general. It was certainly mine. My first ever experience with Pokemon was through the anime. In fact, it was Bye Bye Butterfree, and what an episode to start out with. The episode focuses around Ash having to decide whether or not he should release his Butterfree so it could have a happier life. Why did they decide to make that an episode? Like, you create a show that's meant for kids and then halfway through the show itself has a midlife crisis? Like, man, I can't wait for the episode where Ash dies. Oh wait. I have very fond memories of the Indigo League series. I watched it pretty much every day when I was around 8 or 9, and I really looked forward to it. At the time, you don't think about genres or anything, and to a kid it's just a cartoon. But I really think I owe a lot to Pokemon. Maybe I wouldn't be as open to anime as I am now if I had never watched it. Either way, the anime really was just a decent show in the end. Alongside the anime airing on TV, they released a variety of episodes on VHS. Even though I wasn't really born in the era where VHS was big, I still watched the show in the format quite a bit. The anime was one of my favorites growing up, and it was a great companion piece to the game. But why are there so many seasons? In total, with all the different series, there are 23 seasons. Like, what the hell? That's almost as bad as the number of games. Like, imagine sitting down and watching all that, especially when it's really the type of thing that appeals to younger kids. If you sat down and watched a new episode of Pokemon, you'd be scratching your head wondering what the fuck is happening. 2 years after the show premiered, they released Pokémon the first movie, which focuses on Team Rocket creating the most powerful Pokémon of all time, but it turns against them, and Ash ends up having to stop it. This movie's release was a huge deal at the time, breaking theater records for being the first Japanese film to beat out American films in the US box office. Pokémon had gotten so big, parents were being dragged into the theater for it. A lot of the reviews from the time were, let's say, unfavorable, but let's keep in mind that critics are middle-aged and not really the target demographic. Content they'd find tedious or boring could be a world of fun for a kid watching that movie for the first time. Well, if you hate fun, then you find yourself left with only the trading card game. Back in the day, I played the card game almost as much as the regular games, and while I had fun with it, it never really lived up to the console experience. Yes, I even participated in my local Pokemon League. The first person I played with cheated, and then I never played again. Yeah, the tournament I went to didn't really have a referee or anyone watching the game, so you could just say you won and get points for it. The guy I played with sat down, played his first card, got up, and then told him he won. What a bitch. But hey, I got this cool poster, so maybe it was worth spending hundreds of dollars on paper. The card game itself is like if the battles from the game were 2D and you needed dice. Your focus is on powering up the cards you have in your deck to beat the other person's card from their deck. Yeah, I don't know what I was expecting. The card game is still massive today, with new sets being released regularly. Recently, and unfortunately, people who know nothing about the series or the cards started buying them up as an investment, and people who actually played the game had a hard time finding the cards anywhere. I seriously hate the whole culture behind buying comics and cards, and instead of using them or appreciating them, they send them off to some company who grades them and then it goes into storage for 20 years. That's just me though. I think it's a pretty good game, but I find it hard to get back into it after being away so long. Around the time the show came out, so did a line of toys. Here we have the electronic Pokédex mimicking the one seen in the show, and it probably has one of the best commercials of all time.
Nobody knows every Pokemon.
Master knows!
Who weighs more, Metapod or Pidgeotto? Pidgeotto by 44 pounds. Bulbasaur's height? 2 feet 4 inches.
How does he do it?
The electronic Pokedex for master trainers from Aber to Zubat. Master them all.
Weedle's number? 13.
150 Pokemon with all the best fighting moves. Electronic Pokedex for master trainers. New from Tiger.
Like, come on, how could you not want to immediately waste your money on that? I have one here, and I can safely say this thing is pretty cool for just being a dolled up calculator. Like, yeah, this is pretty much all information you can get from either the game or the show. Even the Pokédex book if you had it. But it helped bring the sense of being a Pokemon master into the real world, even if this was just a glorified calculator. As a kid, I did have this one, but I also had the Diamond and Pearl Pokédex, as well as the Black and White Pokédex. The Diamond and Pearl one acted more so like a game console with mini-games, and hell, the thing even looked like a DS. The Unova region one was pretty much just a cut and dry Pokédex, however. Now, aside from the mainstream toys, there were also the Burger King toys. Yeah, these things were everywhere when they came out. You had the gold-plated cards that came in a cool Pokeball case, there were dolls, keychains, these things, and one of the more infamous ones, the Pokeball keychain. Back in the day, these were actually recalled by Burger King themselves.
Burger King and the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission want you to know about the voluntary recall of this Pokemon Pokeball. The ball may pose a suffocation hazard to children under 3. Throw the ball away or return it to Burger King. The safety of your child is of the utmost importance to us.
Jesus. Yes, apparently kids would put the top half of the Pokeball around their mouths and noses and suffocate, resulting in at least 2 deaths. This was an unfortunate mistake on part of Burger King, but they quickly issued a recall on more than 25 million Pokeballs. In the 90s, they did pretty much everything they could to milk the franchise dry, and it seems they still aren't done. One of the things they did to capitalize was release a full studio album featuring songs from the show and some made for the album specifically. Labeled To Be a Master, it had the Pokemon theme song, Poke Rap, and my favorite off the album, To Be a Master. Honestly, I think I like this album way more than I should. Despite me not being born until 3 years after it was released, I did listen to this album quite a bit as a kid. Man, you don't know cool until you're walking down the street with your Walkman and To Be a Master cassette, playing Pokemon on your Game Boy, wearing your sick-ass Pokemon shirt with your Pokédex, on your way to Blockbuster to rent the latest Pokemon VHS to play on your Pikachu VCR. I think that's what the marketing team at Nintendo hoped would happen. Something I found interesting when researching Pokemon's early days was the infamous Pokemon Live.
Attention Pokemon fans, get ready for Pokemon Live at the Fox Theater. Now you can be there as all your favorite characters come to life in this on-stage musical adventure. It's the only place to see a brand new Pokemon with amazing powers. You can meet Brock, Misty, Ash, and of course Pikachu as the action hits the stage at the Fox Theater. Wanna catch them all? Gotta catch it live. Pokemon Live.
Released in September 2000, Pokemon Live was a stage production based on the show. It featured songs from To Be a Master, as well as some original songs of its own. It only toured for 1 year in America and was quickly forgotten about by the public. Pokemon's own website claimed a filmed version of the show would be available on video, but it was never released. And the show was indeed professionally filmed, but for some reason they decided not to release it. There do exist some fan recordings of the various international performances, and the full thing exists as filmed by Chris Mitchell, a man who worked on the show, but all existing recordings are of poor quality. Some say the professional tapings still exist, but it seems to be in purgatory, never to be released, most likely due to copyright laws. A portion of the show's various puppets and props were discovered in an abandoned Canadian theater. It is unknown whether or not they performed the show in this theater, but most likely they didn't, as their touring locations didn't list this specific location. I really wish we could see the full show someday, as the music is pretty great, and just seeing more 90s Pokemon stuff is a real trip down memory lane. The series was also subject to scrutiny from the media and concerned parents. They all seemed to push the narrative that Pokemon was brainwashing our kids into violence.
Cute, cuddly characters who become supercharged so they can fight their enemies. But some experts say the entire Pokemon phenomenon is the enemy.
In my opinion, parents should not let their kids watch Pokemon, play Pokemon, buy Pokemon cards, have anything whatsoever to do with Pokemon, because the message is violence.
Mortal Kombat came out more than 5 years prior to even the games, and they want to claim that the children's game with an electric rat and literally just a bird is violent? A few religious groups even claim that Pokemon was satanic.
But if they were the three, on us, they'd be this. It means Hail Satan. It's the satanic salute that all Satanists identify themselves with.
Oh, come on, how could you think Pokemon is satanic? Just look at this guy. And this guy. And, yeah, maybe they were right. I don't think Pokemania has ever really left us, just slowed down. It remains one of the best-selling game series of all time. It's probably one of the reasons anime is as relevant in America as it is today. It's one of the most successful trading card series of all time, and it's an immensely popular toy brand among many other things. I don't think Pokemania is going away anytime soon, for better or for worse. Nowadays, Pokemon as a brand has sort of devolved from what it once was. The goal of the brand today is 100% to make money. But along the way, they created something that can reach so many different kinds of audiences, and that's what makes Pokemon so special, to me at least. You will find me dead in my grave before I admit Pokemon Monopoly was a good idea.